Hello, and once again, welcome. This is our last week. This is the week we've been waiting for. Throughout the course, I have mentioned how teaching online can be a privilege, an honor, and it can also be a challenge. So as we wind down this class in the last week, I wanted to share with you some best practices. In fact, there's 10 researched best practices. And I'm going to be talking about each one of those in this lecture, but you will also find that you have a handout that is similar to what I'm going to be saying in this lecture. If you use these 10 best practices, you can approach online learning and teaching with confidence and comfort. When our class first started, especially in the first week, we talked about the importance of being present. And being present means that you are actively engaged with your students, that you interact often. And when that takes place, you'll find that that learning community that we really want to form is going to start to grow. You and your students are suddenly going to begin forming not only personal bonds, but intellectual bonds. If we look at student surveys and end of course comments, we find that most students will say the best faculty and the ones that they felt they learned the most from were those who were very interactive. Not only that, it was faculty who gave opportunities for the student to ask questions, to approach the faculty member, and to feel comfortable in the class. So being present means having office hours if necessary, phoning the students, texting with them, or whatever your university suggests. Our second best practice is to develop a supportive community, and that means communication in three forms: student to student, student to faculty, and student to content. I'll talk about each. Student to student interaction is particularly important. The reason for that is students want to have a place where they can interact with each other, where they can ask questions that they don't have to ask the professor all the time. They also want to share their new knowledge and get clarification. So it's good to monitor the student to student just to make sure that there's no misinformation going on. This particular section, creating this learning community through student to student interaction, can be done in three ways. The three ways that we can use the student-to-student interaction are not new to any of you. We've already talked about them in this class. But let's just briefly go over them. The first one is the personal introductions, and we've talked about that, and that happens usually in the first week of the class, sometimes even before the course starts. It's just getting students to know each other and faculty to know the students. Next is an open forum, and I like to use that sometimes in my classes because it gives students a student cafe where they can just go in and chat. Again, as I've said before, I do monitor that, but I seldom interact in the student cafe. That's really their place. And finally, the question and answer section. Students can interact there. They can answer each other's questions. I can interact and make sure that there's no misleading information. I can also answer the questions, but I really encourage the students to interact there and to answer and maybe give their own explanation, answer a question in their own words. In the beginning days of the course, you certainly want to tell students how you want them to interact in the class, how often you want them to interact, and even some of your rules for communication. One of those important rules, and maybe it's not a rule, but you need to let students know how they should address you. That's important to them. And then you want to let them know the due dates for your assignments, how they should communicate if there's a problem and they can't meet that due date. Besides due dates, I like to let students know about how much time I expect that they're going to be spending each week in this class. That way they can plan ahead and set their calendar. This keeps the surprises to a minimum. Number 4 is to vary the assignments. Students like to do more than just write papers. Instead, we need to allow for creativity and give them different ways besides papers to communicate their new skills. Ask them to share their knowledge in discussions and in creative ways. The learning community, as we know, works best when there's a variety of formats. Building a learning community can also mean that students work together on group projects. We have to remember, though, that many adult students do not like to work in groups, so there has to be options for them. In case you've forgotten, those two terms are defined as synchronous, meaning happening at the same time. That might be something like office hours, when you're in the conversation at the same time, and asynchronous, that can take place at different times, 24/7 usually. That's how the class is usually set up. Covering the 10 best practices is a lengthy lecture. So I'm going to give you a chance to take a little break, and then I'll come back with the second lecture, and we'll be talking about 5 through 10.